Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Zuhayeer. I'm one of the founders of Levels FYI, which is a career and salary transparency website that we started approximately 7 years ago now. So excited to be here and talk a little bit about idea validation, product validation, and how we think about it at Levels FYI. So the first thing I want to get across and kind of just communicate is that there's no such thing as a perfect idea. I think I kind of want to dispel this notion because just like products evolve over time, ideas will evolve over time. There's kind of like a market, and like ideas will eventually become something that originally wasn't. And so more often than not, the idea you end with will not be the idea that you started with. And so perhaps like the message here, the most important message here is, idea validation is important, but perhaps the most important thing is to just get started so you can leapfrog into other ideas and kind of explore other kind of things more quickly. And so, everything that I share in this presentation will kind of be qualified by that you should just get started with something so that you can actually find other ideas. The next thing I'll say is you should find a problem instead of just an idea. You want to obsess over a problem space rather than just a specific idea, because ideas will change, problem spaces will kind of remain and stay the same. And so you'll be surprised how many people are building things for non-real problems. There are, you're 95% ahead of most startups if you can actually define and solve like a real problem. And I would know this because for many years, I've actually built things that just didn't solve any problem. I would build solutions in search of a problem. And that never works because you kind of come up with this superficial reason to kind of apply this technology or this AI to like some particular problem set, but it's not genuine. You're not working from the problem back to the idea. And so you want to make sure you're rooted in a problem and you can kind of work backwards from the problem to the idea and not the other way around. And so that's exactly what we did with Levels.fyi. We started very much with the frustration of just not understanding what leveling was in the tech industry. And for me personally, I was a junior at the time in college, and I just couldn't make sense of the fact that the starting level at like Microsoft was like 59, and I just had no idea what that meant. And then there was L3 at another company, MTS somewhere else, and I just couldn't make sense of any of it. And so I took it online and just looked up like what these levels even meant. And what I found is people were similarly frustrated all over kind of the industry, just with this kind of nomenclature or the lack of kind of transparency into this nomenclature. And so this is kind of like a early rendition of what we mocked up the site to be. Very early sketch. It's really intended to kind of show how rough around the edges things are in their V0, V1 kind of phase. It ends up not exactly taking shape of the first thing that you kind of put out. We kind of set out to solve this problem. So we kind of took this structured data for kind of leveling, put it into like this kind of JSON object that we then kind of rendered onto the site, which is what you kind of see even today. If you go to the homepage, you'd kind of be able to map these company levels across kind of the industry. And that was really the acute problem we were solving. Not even salaries at this point, just kind of leveling in the industry. So the next thing I would mention is that you want to solve an acute problem rather than an abstract problem. And what I mean by that is you want to focus on something very acute, measurable, tractable, tangible, so that you can actually measure what your results are. And so things like, for example, solving world hunger, corruption, education, great problems, but they're very abstract. And it's very hard for you to measure what the impact you're having on that is. And so a better problem space to kind of go into, for example, with the case of hunger, is solving hunger in your particular city or in a neighborhood or in an area, something tractable, something you can kind of measure. That's something we absolutely think about at Levels.fyi is like every problem we want to define, we want it to be acute, something we can measure, something we can get metrics for very quickly. Now, this is a little silly, but you should absolutely Google your problem or use Perplexity AI, whatever you want. Just go online and check out what's going on out there. You'll be surprised how many people skip this very, very obvious step You could literally do this in bed. Like it's probably the easiest validation you'll do. Just look up what's going on kind of in your problem space. And there may be people working on the same problem. There may be a huge graveyard of startups that have died on like some mistake that you haven't even looked into. So you should kind of go down that rabbit hole and just look up what people had done in the past and try to learn from them. You'll be surprised how many people are willing to give you a phone call if you're just willing to reach out. And so just finding, and I think the particular challenge in the case of finding, like, for example, a graveyard of startups is identifying what maybe has changed from then to now that allows you to actually not make those same mistakes, right? And so Googling the problem is just like a very straightforward way to kind of just get very early validation. Next thing you want to do is you actually want to build an MVP. And this is where perhaps I'm a little bit more opinionated on kind of the approach. People will tell you to talk to your users, and I'm all for talking to your users, and it's important. But I think building something and putting it in front of users is almost more important than just talking to users, because users will tell you one thing but then do another thing. And so teasing out the difference between the stated preference of a user and their revealed preference as they kind of use your product really only happens if you can put something in front of them and give them some action that they can kind of do. And you just kind of get into this habit of just building things and not falling in love with what you build, but rather just realizing it's an iterative process. Your product will change over time. It won't remain the same. And the longer you take to kind of get something in front of users, the more you kind of fall in love with the particular product or with a particular feature that may not work in the real world. And so you want to kind of dispel like that affinity that you have towards like a particular thing and just be able to kind of ship and iterate on things based on that problem or based on that user and the feedback that you get. So, and this next point is kind of related to how you would build an MVP. I think this kind of gets into the fun of doing like a startup. The creative side is like, you want to be able to kind of try cheap ways. You want to have cheap ways to try things. And I would argue that the opposite of a startup is not a large company, but rather formal processes. And so the more formal you get, the more structured it is, the more you're kind of draining creativity out of the process. And so you want to find quick, easy, informal ways to actually get things done. And some tangible examples of this, and these are just kind of off-the-cuff examples, but for example, maybe you don't even need a website to actually deliver your product. Maybe you just need an email newsletter or just sending an email to like a couple of people to kind of validate something. Perhaps it's even as simple as, maybe you want to try out whether people want to buy a product. You can put up a buy now button that actually doesn't let you do anything, but it lets you test how many people actually end up clicking on this button. And so then you can kind of deliver on that product if you realize that there is enough demand, right? And we're all about this at Levels FYI, and perhaps many of you may have kind of seen how we've done things in the early days, but one of the things that we did very early on was people kind of, so far I've talked about leveling and kind of how they kind of compare in the industry, but users very quickly came to us and asked for compensation information as it relates to those levels. And so we found the easiest and simplest way to kind of release salaries was to just put up a Google form. And so we created this Google form, and at this point, we didn't even know the fields that we wanted in here. We knew that we needed some things like company, total compensation, location, but as we went, we realized, we actually need a whole bunch of other fields, like a focus area, the title of the role, years of experience. And Google Forms really just allowed us to quickly iterate on that because we were able to just add these fields in, quickly get it out, and just expose all this data to users. And the way we exposed this data to users was also very simple. We decided the best way to get this in front of users, like the submitted data, is to just give them the Google Sheet. And so that's sort of what we did. We literally embedded basically something like this into our website directly so that people can kind of just look at the raw data, and we could kind of collect demand of how many people are just like looking at this, how many people are like slicing it, and people kind of just spent a lot of time on this sheet. And so from there we realized, as we're kind of collecting more and more data, we're able to aggregate it on on a much higher level. And so what we ended up doing is our needs kind of changed, right? Like users actually wanted to slice more into kind of aggregate level compensation, like medians, be able to view more details. And so that's when we kind of switched over to, and we didn't leave Google Sheets. We actually just imported the data from Google Sheets into like this JSON file. And then we kind of put a custom kind of UI on top of it. And so now people can kind of like view this kind of table view format for all the salaries. Eventually, we were kind of collecting enough data that we could aggregate data by a particular level and a particular company. And so now we could even show compensation at that granularity. And so that's when we realized, okay, we can build like a modal that people can kind of view on top of like all the leveling structures that we're showing. And so this was like a very early rendition of that, often how ideas start. And then this is how it looked initially on the website. Very ugly, but but it's kind of how things kind of get shipped initially. And then kind of fast forwarding to today, we now have enough data that we can show salary distributions by level at different companies, by location, and all of the things you can kind of see online today was really just made possible by that entire journey. And what I wanted to highlight with this is that everything was made possible because we took that first step of just putting that Google form and Google Sheet out. And so just taking that first step and then kind of validating it at each step of the way is what allowed us to kind of get to the point we're at today. And it's very much kind of this model is what I kind of share with folks is, you're kind of building the skateboard, then the scooter, then the bike, and then the car. And each of them are a complete product by itself. It's not like you're just building the wheel of a car that's unusable by itself. You're kind of building these whole products in and of itself and then kind of iterating on it as you go. And that's really the approach we try to take as much as possible in Levels FYI. So this is a quote from Brian Armstrong, who's the CEO and founder of Coinbase. And so he basically said, action produces information, just keep doing stuff. And so the example that he relates to kind of, I think it was on this podcast, was, if you were on a mountain, a foggy mountain, where you can only see 3 steps in front of you, you would end up having to take a couple of steps just to see where you're headed. And it might so be that you end up at a cliffside, and so you have to backtrack and kind of come back and try to take another route. And I think this kind of encapsulates the startup journey in a lot of ways. You're basically taking these shots in the dark and trying to illuminate this cavern around you. And every subsequent shot is getting better and better. But you kind of have to keep playing this game of trying to illuminate the path in front of you. And so, I think the message there is really to just keep building things. You want to keep building things to feel things out. And this is an ethos that we really take very seriously at Levels FYI, and we want to basically lower the barrier from having an idea as an individual and then getting it directly in front of users. If you can minimize that distance, then you tighten the loop, and the more you tighten the loop, the more this compounds, the faster feedback you get, the more ideas you get, and the more you can kind of continue to just learn about your problem space and build a genuine intuition for your problem space that many people won't even have, because you're just able to like rapidly iterate and learn. And so, crude is always okay. Our motto at Levels.fi is like a crude V1, a crude V0, completely fine, but it's not going to remain a V1 or a V0 for very long if you're directionally correct in any way. And so you just want to, our ethos is to keep putting things out, keep building, learn fast, and sharpen things as you go. You sand off the edges as you kind of go. And so that kind of concludes my presentation for today. Really just wanted to give you an idea of how we kind of think about things, but happy to answer any questions about Levels FYI or just idea validation in general. Thank you.
Great. So when you're building these complete products, how do you, if you're building too much or too little, how did you iterate that? I guess
Yeah, I think I think it's a hard balance to strike all the time, but we try to do the cheapest things possible. Even today, some of the things we do, even users get sketched out. But if people are willing to do it, I think it just lets you know, even just one person at one point in time doing something that involves a lot of effort. Like for example, we have people send us an email if they want to edit like one of their salary submissions, because it's much easier to just have them send us an email than to build like an editor, right? And so if like we get enough people doing that, that we're now, okay, like we should build that, right? And so I think finding the cheapest way to validate, like if there's a need, is more important than building the actual thing. And so once you can validate that there is the actual need and customers can communicate that to you in some way, and you can kind of determine, oh, they're pounding at the door for this, then you can kind of gather the resources and actually try to build the thing. But I think getting that validation is actually more important than building the thing itself.
I get it. How do you, because when talking to customers, they're always going to say, I want to.
Yeah.
So how do you minimize those type of distractions versus like, oh, yeah, I'm just.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think what I tried to touch on with the presentation is getting started and kind of thinking about validation just from the beginning. But you're thinking about validation throughout the whole journey. And so, I think what you kind of want to balance there is users will tell you what their problem is, but ultimately it's on you to kind of come up with what the solution is, right? And so I think that's where it takes a little bit of your creative side to kind of come up with synthesize user feedback with what you know about your business and how people actually behave when using your product, and kind of coming up with the novel solution that integrates all of that. And it's not always going to be that the user asks for something and you build what they specifically say. It's more like they'll give you suggestions on what their problem and issue is, and you kind of look at it from your perspective and try to encapsulate a solution around that, right? And so it's not always going to be just like, in some cases it is that simple though. Like if there's a bug, that's pretty simple. Like you have to fix that. And so I think the challenge and the fun part, frankly, about being a founder is synthesizing all of that information into like a holistic product.
On that note, I think you were talking about sort of like reveal preferences, just stated preferences, and understanding that compensation was the direction you want to head in. Would you say analytics is a very important piece to understanding that delta between what people say they want versus what they actually want?
100%. So I think analytics, metrics, just behavioral information about a user tells you a ton about them that they wouldn't be willing to tell you, right? They wouldn't tell you that, hey, like I actually care about this thing, but they'll reveal it through their actions on the site, right? And so I think it's very important to kind of pay attention to that. We actually even use like this thing called Clarity, where you're able to even see just it's anonymized, but you can see the way that people are interacting with the site, right? Like you can kind of view it, and it just puts you in the user's shoes to kind of really understand what's going on. Because sometimes it's hard to just look at like hard metrics and numbers and derive like what a user's feeling. But if you actually see like what they're doing, like I feel like it gives you a little bit more insight into, hey, what are they feeling? Why are they like thrashing around like with their mouse? Like why are they so frustrated, And so yeah, I think it's very important to have like the proper telemetry and just instrumentation to be able to understand like what your user is going through.
Yeah. So I was wondering, since you are building a tool that has might be a dual edited user, one being the one provides the data, one who uses the data, how do you incentivize the initial people to be able to provide that data? Because what's in it for them in that first?
Yeah, it's a good question, and honestly, one that you might not expect is we actually provided zero incentive in the beginning for people to submit data. Part of that, and even today, we actually maintain as little incentive as possible, and part of the reason for that is for us to be a truly accurate and platform, we want people to derive value from the site and the platform first before they actually kind of come back and contribute. And the reason for that is, there's always, like, if you provide an incentive, people will gamify it and they will like submit like incorrect data, spam, and it'll just increase our overhead for how we have to kind of monitor for that kind of thing. And so for us, we actually provided zero incentive in the beginning. Like, do you find this useful? Like, if you find it useful, are you willing to contribute? And if you are, that's great. And that's really the only incentive we give you, so that we continue to kind of create this place, or like we foster more accuracy and getting value from the product first before you actually come back and contribute to it. So in some ways, we've deliberately actually minimized incentive on that end. We're starting to add like small like nudges here and there, like, hey, contribute your salary, like it really helps. You can always skip through it. But I think part of that is just being intentional so that we don't have to deal with that overhead of people just trying to gamify and get through. Yeah.
Do you have any examples of when you incorrectly validated an idea or an assumption and the after effects of that?
Yeah, definitely. So we've actually used to have a career coaching service. We recently kind of slowly wound that down. And the reason for that was users would come to us all the time asking for, hey, like I need help with general career guidance. But I think going back to my point of acute versus abstract, I think what we had kind of entered into was we were solving an abstract problem. Today we have like two other services. We have a negotiation service and a resume review service, very tactical, and the outcome is very defined. You know, after you do like a negotiation, you're either making X amount more or you're not. After a resume review, you're either getting more interviews and applications in or not, you're not like making it to the next step. With career coaching, we had nothing to measure. Like it was like, did you feel good after the meeting or not? And that's not like something you can kind of accurately assess. And so that was, I think, a mistake on our part. Like we got the user feedback, but we didn't think about how we serve the solution to them, right? We should have thought a little bit more deeply about what the solution is, what their actual underlying problem is, and how we could solve that. And so I feel like that was kind of like a mistake on our part in kind of just keeping it too abstract. We should have boiled it down to the acute problem, you know?
How do you validate the idea? Like initially, like when you just present, like, hey, we'll offer this insert.
I think it was this was a case more of users came to us and just said like, hey, we want this. But oftentimes what users say is not like the exact thing that you need to build. It's more, you have to do more thinking around like what you actually want to deliver to the end user. Yeah.
So two-part question. First, I saw you had a lot of data on your Google form. How long does that take you to essentially build up and then be able to kind of execute all that?
Yeah, I think it was like slow than fast. This was back in 2017 when we first started. It was like, I wouldn't say like maybe a couple data points a day. And we were excited about that. Luckily, we had some traffic just coming in for the leveling kind of problem that we were talking about. And so people were kind of visiting the site. People were already kind of familiar with like what we had. And so we just kind of added a button to add your salary, view salaries, and so slowly people started populating it. And I think it was on the order of just like single digit like entries that we were collecting, but each data point was just so valuable to people that we realized that this is like we're on the cusp of something pretty incredible, because the fact that most kind of services out there at that time didn't consider the leveling structure at all, and the fact that we were predicated on the leveling structure because we already had it, just allowed us to derive a lot of value from each single data point, because each data point just had so much metadata surrounding it, like the level, the title, the company, that it just made it very valuable and something you just couldn't get anywhere else. And so it was slow, and then as people found out about it, people started coming and contributing much, much more. And I think today it's like on the order of probably like tens of thousands of data points a month around. It's still live today? Not the Google form, but we have our own custom form. We still use Google Sheets like pretty extensively, and in some ways like we have some forms that feed directly into it, but now we have like a database that it kind of goes directly. And the form is way more custom because the form started off pretty simple, basic, but now we have a lot more validation, a lot more things we collect, vesting schedules. It gets pretty complicated. Startup options data.
And this my second question was, you said look at user behavior, figure out what they're feeling versus what they're doing on the platform. How did you, and you said clarity, but like how did you monitor that in like the beginning when people were just coming on and doing things?
Yeah. Part of it was also because we were users of our own site, we kind of just monitored how we were feeling using the site. And so a lot of it was just us being like dog fooders of our own product, right? Like if I like viewed our own site, am I clear what this is showing? What am I doing? Like I kind of just monitor my own behavior, like how am I kind of going across the pages? And so I would say like early on where you have limited data, it's like limited kind of visibility. it was more intuition, right? More like, hey, I'm using the product. What would I want? How would I want to use it? And that loop is also much quicker because it's happening in one head, right? I'm just talking to myself and then just shipping product. And so that loop just makes it so much quicker that you kind of just make these assumptions. Of course, some of them were wrong along the way, and you kind of find out as you get more users. But initially, it was just really us like projecting our kind of picture of it onto the site, and then kind of error correcting as we kind of went along. So initially, I would say we leaned a lot more on ourselves, just as, and then also like I would also throw in maybe close friends, right? Like friends that we had that were that we could just get feedback from and just more earnest feedback from. Like I said, like I still think it's like building and shipping something is more important than just strictly talking to people, because people will tell you all sorts of things. And so just having something to show by like, hey, I shipped this new feature, send it to someone, and just be like, tell me what you think. And just trying to get kind of earnest feedback.
Yep. At what point did you determine the business model?
Yeah, we actually were pretty intentional about coming up with a business model from pretty early on in the business. We started off doing ads, well, not necessarily ads, it was actually recruiting leads for a company called TripleByte. So we reached out pretty early on and just said, hey, like we're getting some traffic from like this audience of mostly engineers. Would you be willing to work with us? And so we kind of created this very interesting setup initially where we kind of took like 4% of like a resulting engineer who gets placed through like their hiring process, of 4% of their first year salary. Now the turnaround for that was very long, because someone would start like going through our application funnel. A few months later, maybe they would actually like get the offer, and then a few months later, maybe they would actually start, at that company. So we'd get payouts like months later. And so we eventually switched to like a CPC model, which is like in advertising, you just kind of cost per click. And then after that, we actually removed ads completely from our site and went directly into our services. And the reason for that is we think, like if you're serving ads, you're inherently kind of like cutting yourself off in some ways, because it's like you're providing some more value to someone else. And so we wanted to have our own set of services and set of products that people can purchase. And so we started kind of building our own services, starting with the negotiation service, where we more explicitly kind of get and increase like people's outcomes with their offers. And so once we kind of had that in place, we removed ads from our site and we just started selling our service. That started growing, and so we started growing like our team of coaches that we had. They're all contractors, but they're recruiters in the industry that kind of work with us to kind of coach candidates. And from there, this was also pretty early on, but now we've been more focused on it. We have an enterprise side offering where we help companies benchmark kind of pay within their organizations. And so we work with like a number of companies like Apple, Netflix, Snap, like just to name a couple. And they basically use kind of our tool to kind of help inform their pay bands internally. And so we started to build like a software kind of tool there. And now we've been kind of more like kind of building more kind of features around it as like more and more companies express interest.
But what is your distribution process look like? You said that you got a lot of your users in the beginning due to word of mouth, or did you have like some sort of strategy to get more users on board using the tool?
Yeah, it's a good question. Early on, it was definitely word of mouth. I think word of mouth is the most important thing for any company that's consumer facing to some degree. And if people are not sharing your product with other friends, then you probably haven't built something compelling yet. And so word of mouth is also very hard to measure, right? It's hard to actually locate all the instances where someone like just said, hey, check out Levels FYI. But there are ways you can kind of proxy for it, right? Like mentions online. So we use this tool called F5bot, which basically scours Reddit and Hacker News for like mentions of like your product. And it just notifies you. And so we would use that to kind of just keep tabs on like where we're getting mentioned, who's using us, who is the user that we kind of like really need to build for. And then in terms of like, as we kind of grew from word of mouth, we started to realize we wanted to be more strategic about just general distribution. And so the thing we kind of really leaned into was SEO and just we realized we were getting a lot of traffic from Google search already, but we didn't optimize for it at all. It was just kind of like the website was there, people searched for tech salaries and would find us. And so we wanted to get deeper into kind of creating pages for all the companies we have, all the roles we have, all the titles we have, and then just putting it out there. And so I think even today, if you like Google like Facebook salaries or Google salaries or something, we'll probably be up there, hopefully. And that eventually became like a very large flywheel effect for us, people coming to the site, using it, getting data, contributing data, and then increasing like our footprint even more. Nowadays, I want to say like with AI and stuff, it's actually like SEO is actually like affected. We were actually looking at our metrics earlier, where there's like a slight dip in like people actually clicking out to websites because they just get the results in the search kind of tool itself. And so it's funny, Google used to have this metric where they would track how fast can I get someone off of Google to like a resulting web page, because that was the metric of you doing your job effectively. Spending less time on Google was better. But now it's like, shifted back to like they want all the traffic at Google. So because of that, we've been thinking a little bit more about just content platforms and how we can kind of promote things. The other thing is like we're trying to expand more internationally, and so just thinking about how in different locales different things are used as discovery vehicles, right? Like people discover things in different ways, and so thinking about like, okay, in Europe or in India or in other like markets, how do people discover these things, or how do people end up talking about it? And so that's been kind of an interesting learning journey for us, and I don't know if you have all the answers there yet.
I remember using you guys' platform to like find internships during the internship hunt. How much things are paid. How do you guys make money? Because I know like to access more salaries, you got to type in some stuff or enter some data on your guys' website. How do you guys monetize?
Yeah, we don't monetize off of that at all, very explicitly, because we want people to benefit from the data no matter what. We do nudge you in certain ways to contribute back to the site. The two ways we make money today are on the consumer end. We have a negotiation service and a resume review service. We have like multiple packages for that. So depending on your level, we have like a mid-level, senior level, and a leadership level, so C-suite, director level kind of package where we help people basically negotiate their outcomes. We also guarantee the outcomes. So if we're unable to actually increase your offer, you're not paying anything. It's really upon success that we kind of benefit. And it's been a great service for folks to kind of just help them negotiate their outcomes. And the resume review service almost like leads up into our negotiation service. I would consider it kind of like a lead into it, but like our resume review service also helps people get more job prospects, like applications, interviews, and we help people kind of spruce up their profiles so that they can get hear back from more companies. So that's the consumer side. Enterprise side, we have the compensation benchmarking tool, which companies use to basically benchmark pay within their organizations. And the example I'll give here is like, let's say you're Apple, right? You're hiring hardware engineers. What you want to do is you want to basically benchmark against your talent peers. And so what we allow you to do on our benchmark tool is you can now input, like let's say Facebook, NVIDIA as your talent peers, and then you can now see the like percentiles for compensation for that group of people. And you can basically slice data in, that's just like a very simplistic example, but you can slice data in a whole lot of different ways to basically set your own compensation bands internally so that you're most competitive with the market. And so companies use our tool to kind of get that market insight. Like companies have been like, that I would say has been our fastest growing kind of revenue driver. Companies have been kind of very, very interested in just market data and more recently just AI kind of compensation information. A lot of this stuff is typically hidden. And to give you a little bit of a sense of the landscape, not to go too much into this, but typically what compensation is set by these surveys. There are these large conglomerate companies that will do large surveys of like compensation data across companies, and they'll basically send out aggregate reports of averages. But like companies like Facebook, Apple, they'll contribute their data to this kind of survey, but it'll have to be anonymized when it's sent back out to everyone. So it's not as useful for a company like Apple who's trying to be at the 90th percentile, competing particularly against like a couple of different companies. they just get these averages back from the market. And so with our data, they kind of get this layer on top where they can now like target specific companies and target specific roles and be able to price their talent more effectively. The ultimate end goal and the metric we track there is offer acceptance rates. How many offers are being accepted versus rejected from a company's perspective. And that's really like one of the best ways to measure like how effective you are being at like capturing talent.
Oh, good. So do you think the services business is like fully scalable, or does it like hit a limit because you have like how much falls or something like that? And then on the software side, what are they getting on top of your like product?
Yeah. So our negotiation service is actually very strategic. It's not just for revenue, although the revenue is great. Our packages are also expensive. They're anywhere from I think $1,200 up to $5,000 to purchase. So if you like want to put that in SaaS terms, if you have a lifetime value of 1 year and like you're charging $9 a month, it's much more than that. So like I mean, just to put things in perspective a little bit, it is a one-time fee, but it is a large fee. And then on top of that, it gets us a lot more real-time market insight into what's going on in the market today. At any given time, I can go into like our negotiation service and see, okay, the lay of the land, who's hiring for what role, what's going on, and who's not hiring, or like what other insight can I get from the market today? And some of the recent things are vesting schedules have been changing like crazy more recently. And so we get insight on that like pretty much real time because these offers are going out to our candidates. And candidates will often come to us with not just one offer, but up to like 6, 7 offers. And these are all market verified data points because it's their incentive to for us to help them, right? And so it's really just contributing to this flywheel where we collect more data, and the more data we get, the more we can kind of expand our footprint. But it also just gives us like general market insight on kind of what's going on. So I mean that's the strategic aspect, but we still see this service being a core part of just our business overall. I think integrating consumers into like our business model keeps us like very like in service of users, and so we always want to have like this aspect of our business because it really helps us like just serve our end customers. And also it's just like I think one of the most impactful pages on our site is if you go to Levels FYI and /services and you click on our reviews, you just see like all the outcomes that we've gotten more recently, and it's like plus 50K, plus 30K. And when people message you like this really changed my outcome and like for my family here, or like I think that is like very meaningful, and so we love hearing that. And so this is something we kind of want to scale and like make even better over time. And so I think the negotiation service, like if you ask my co-founder too, it's like one of the most exciting parts of our business.
Yep. What's really interesting to me, like you're like very mindful and strategic. I remember like going on your website, you like really like from that you let me look at salary with like mine in, and that was my biggest frustration about like store or Indeed and stuff like that. But it's interesting to me that you never mentioned those other competitors when we got on where, right? Mm-hmm. Have you identified unique value proposition? Because it didn't sound like you're focused on your competitors, and like you have advice about being mindful or not obsessed about your competitors?
Yeah. I always think it's kind of a disservice to yourself to kind of think about competitors too much, because it's like rent free, first of all. And like second, it's like you want to work, like I mentioned, you want to work back from the user's problem, from first principles to your kind of solutions, rather than comparing yourself to a competitor who might be doing something completely wrong and you're just like following along with like what they've done. So I think it's always better to kind of have your own kind of take on things. Just look at like how a user or like how your users are responding to your product, if what you build, like how they're reacting, and just from first principles try to determine like what is it that they really want and what is it that we can build, right? And I think if you look at our leveling kind of structures, like people almost develop this blindness to like problems just because that's just the way things are. But one of the things that made me really just that night that I saw that people are facing this problem of leveling, I just went home and I was like, dude, I need to make this. Like, it's just so obvious. It's like in plain sight, hidden in plain sight. Like like to give you a sense of what I mean by that, it's like I went online and I was just looking up that issue, right, like of leveling, and people all across like different forums, Quora, Blind, Reddit, were literally posting the same permutation of this question of, hey, I'm a level 62 at Microsoft. What does that mean at LinkedIn? What does that mean at Google? How do I know what level I should be? And there were like hundreds of these questions. I'm like, there has to be a better way to just answer these people's questions without having to like individualize each question for like each particular situation. And so I went home that night, I was like, I gotta like create something so that people can just understand what leveling is. Because and it was a personal frustration too. I just didn't know that like companies had different nomenclature up until that point. And a lot of credit to my co-founder, because he was actually going through like a job switch at that time. And so he was switching from LinkedIn to Amazon. And LinkedIn notoriously at the time actually had a lot of title inflation. And so they basically, their second level was called senior. But at most tech companies, the third level is like senior. And so he wanted to make sure he just ended up at the right level when he switched, and wasn't down leveled like very low because of that reputation. And so that was like a big part of like the problem that he was facing more acutely, like as an actual like as an actual candidate, in the job market. I think like being thoughtful, being mindful, it just boils down to really just understanding your user's problem and just like really trying to capture the essence of what they're experiencing, and not focusing too much on what other people are doing, because that won't inform what's next. And the reason I mentioned the leveling example, like no one did that before we did it. No one really like thought to like map those things, even though actually companies themselves internally do it because they know it's a problem. But no one had done it for consumers.
You were focused on the leveling problem, and you weren't thinking about monetizing it.
Yeah, Levels FYI was a side project in the beginning, and I actually encourage all of my friends to think of their companies as projects, because I feel like it strips away that formality of like, hey, this is a company, I have employees, I have a board, I have equity, and like all of that stuff doesn't matter. What matters at the end is, are you solving the core problem? And the more you can think of it as an experiment or like a project, the more you kind of really funnel into like a user's kind of problem, and you don't really think about all these other things that don't matter, right? And like HR, accounting, like who cares? Like, are you solving that problem or are you not? Yeah.
I'll go up this way.
It's a very brief question, but have you guys ever like considered going after other industries where there's like a lack of transparency, so like investment banking, like really just like finance, consulting? Because like I guess they have Wall Street Oasis, but they don't really have like a rich.
Yeah, we've definitely thought about it, and we are actively expanding kind of our role taxonomy that we support. And so I think finance is in there, law and like accounting, and there's a number of others that we're kind of thinking about. The way we kind of think about it though is we don't want to just chase after everything. We kind of want to be like a little bit thoughtful about where we have the most impact, because there are roles where transparency is great, but can you do anything about it? Is it actionable? Perhaps not, and so we want to really go after the highest leverage roles. Like finance, I think, is there, where you can have the most leverage after you have this information. Like information itself isn't just like telling you that, okay, this is what you're getting paid. It's allowing you to basically negotiate or like unlock this potential that you wouldn't have otherwise had. And so those are the roles that we really want to target, the ones with the highest leverage, a lot of autonomy, and kind of going after kind of those first. And I think finance falls in there. There's a few others that we're kind of thinking about, sales also being one of them in particular. And so kind of just thinking about like, okay, overall volume of people we're helping combined with like the actual impact that we can have. Yeah.
How do you guys take into account like marketing trading in regards to like, salaries going up and down, or like, calculating data for example, 2017? Is that stuff still in calculations or?
Yeah, no, so we definitely we don't age data. What we do is we basically have like a time aware kind of, like all of our aggregate values are dependent on whether we have statistical volume within a recent time frame. So what we do is we kind of do like a gradient descent backwards, where we start with the most recent kind of time frame. if within the last month we have enough data, then we'll show you the aggregate data for the last month. If we don't have enough data, we go further back. If we don't have enough data going further back, then we'll go even more further back. And then in the case, like we go, I think up to like maybe 1 or 2 years. And then afterwards we kind of just, hey, here's the data that we do have. We don't know anything about like the recent, like, so we kind of like have like timing kind of baked into kind of like the aggregations that we do. Yeah.
So when it comes to building, and I know we kind of focus on the niche of it, but how many times does lightning need to strike for you to realize, oh, is this a new category forming? Like, for example, our product, we had like 4 law firms sign up for our platform to interview principals, counsels to come in and stuff like that. For you guys, like, what if you guys had an influx of different categories? Like, do you guys stay the course, or do you A/B test it? Like, I'm just trying to understand how do you guys internally think about that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think what we try to do is we try to leave room for discovery no matter what. And so what that means is, like, on our form, we have structured data. So you can enter like a title or a role from a particular like drop down that we have. But how do we learn if there's something new that we just haven't captured in the market? So we allow people to enter custom freeform things as well. And once we notice there's some sort of volume around some custom freeform thing, you know, whether that's a particular role, this has been more prevalent with AI actually today. Like research scientist roles are now much more prevalent. And they might actually be categorized as its own job family, perhaps now even, than just a mere job title, you know? And so, so thinking about like, okay, how do we factor that in? It's a living thing. It's not like we're just rigid in time. We want to encapsulate things that are like coming in, and we're allowing for discovery in all these places so that we can actually learn from, you know, new things that are coming in. But to kind of answer your question about, I guess, just how do we stay the course, right? I think now more than ever, you realize that adaptability is everything. And so, you know, I don't think you always stay the course. Like, I think it's good to have a plan, but you have to recognize your plan can change and will change over time as new factors kind of come in. And so, you know, like, I think what has helped with that is we have a very lean team. We're 10 people, and we think everyone on our team is very capable of doing things. We shoulder a lot of responsibility on each member of our team. But that means that anytime we need to like steer the ship in a certain direction, we're able to do it like very quickly. And we are able to do it like pretty rapidly to the point where, like, you know, it's something that we like kind of prize about our team is like, if we need to do something tomorrow, we should be able to do it. Like, we should just be able to go and do it. And so I think adaptability is definitely very important. I think, you know, there may be a case where perhaps there's no use of like our previous platform and we have to innovate like beyond it. Our goal every day is to kind of, you know, going back to your point about competitors, it's not to beat a competitor, it's to beat ourselves from last year and make sure that we're way better than who we were. And you know, just really like treat ourselves as the incumbent. We're the incumbent. Let's try to like outpace ourselves here.
One last thing. So so it comes back to like the MVP stage, and this kind of goes for everybody. Like, building a good master default allows you to capture everything, but stay the course at the same time. So you don't need to constantly rebuild. This is kind of like the best approach.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. But like, I'd also say that there is a case where perhaps like there is a future where, you know, you actually aren't in that state of the course. Like, you don't have that default anymore. And I think you always have to keep that mindset as a founder is you're not going to have it forever. Like, you're not. And so you have to constantly think about what the next thing is and how you can kind of continue delivering value. And you should always wear that beginner hat, I think, and that like have that new mindset to not get too, I guess, engrossed into like what you already have. And so I do agree that you want to create like a platform benefit for yourself where you create this beautiful like organization or like solution where you are able to leverage the network effects of it, but recognize that, you know, the heyday might end at some point. Like, nothing's forever. So nothing is sacred, as they say. Like you have to be willing to tear like the whole house of cards down and kind of start from scratch as well. And if you can take that perspective, you can come up with new things as well, right? And not just focus on what you've already done.
Okay. Like, question on fundraising. So, did you guys fundraise early on? Have you had iterative rounds?
Yeah.
Were you self-sustaining? Kind of, what was your process?
Yeah, early on we were bootstrapped. We raised a round of funding in 2021. It was our only round of funding. It was a pretty small round. It was mainly kind of just angels. We had a team to kind of hire our team. So there's a couple angels, family, friends, kind of thing. And basically, the impetus for the round was to hire that team that we were kind of thinking of. And the reason for it was very practical and logical. And we like to make very practical decisions when it comes to this. Like, it was basically me and my co-founder working on the idea for the longest time. We were just, when we switched to full time to Levels FYI, it was 2019. We both decided that the reason why we couldn't do more was because our time was handicapped. Because he was working a full-time job, I was somewhere else. Like, we needed to put more time in. Like, this was, that side project was already our full-time job, but we needed to put even more time, like, into it. And so he quit his job. I left my other startup, and we kind of went full-time on Levels. From there, we were just working away, like, pretty much just working every day, like, just trying to grind it out. And at some point, we were like, hey, like, we really need help, actually. Like, this is not, like, what we're constrained on is, like, a team. And so we're like, okay, what are we constrained on from, like, hiring that team for ourselves? It's capital. And so that's when we decided, okay, we should go raise some capital so that we can actually make this a reality, so that we have a team. Now, we think of things very practically today, too. Like, hey, what's bottlenecking us today? It's not capital. We actually have, like, we're making enough revenue. We're able to kind of support and sustain our team. What it is like just doing product work and, like, creating new things. And so that is, like, on us. And so if at any point in the future the bottleneck becomes capital again, hey, like, we need to hire, like, a sales team, or we need to hire, like, a larger team overall, then we'll consider raising capital again if we're, not sufficiently profitable enough that we can do it ourselves. But, like, it's really just a mathematical equation. Like, do we need the capital? Then we'll go kind of raise money. And so from that sense, we try to be a little bit more practical. I know, like, other people have, like, philosophies around, like, raising a war chest. When money is cheap, just raise money. But we're very, like, if you need it, raise it. If you don't need it, like, just do your thing.
So just follow to that, are you kind of staying in, like, the 10-year trajectory where it's like, okay, at the 10th year, we want to go for an acquisition, we want an IPO, we want, like, so, like, are you thinking like that, or is it more just like we're sustaining our build and see where we go?
Yeah, I think actually, people think of acquisitions and IPOs as outcomes, but I actually think they're means to, like, the greatest acquisitions are means to, like, something larger because you get, like, more resources. The greatest IPOs are a means to, like, get the public market to fund, like, what you're actually building. And so I don't see those as outcomes. Like, if you think of your project as a long-term project, I think what you think of it as is like, okay, this is, like, one of the means I can take to actually grow this thing, this business. And so the way I like to think about it is growth. We're just trying to grow and we're trying to build this thing. Whatever the means are, we'll kind of determine along the way. The means are constantly changing. Companies are not IPOing as much in this day and age, and so maybe that's not the means anymore. Maybe there's another way, like, and perhaps that is just straight profitability and issuing dividends to investors. And so, like, I think the means is variable, but the goal is just to grow the business and kind of chase this growth. But the means to how you get there can be variable. And so I don't think of it as like, okay, do we need an IPO or acquisition? I think if that equation makes sense, where we're able to use, like, the resources of an acquisition, or we're able to use, like, an IPO to kind of fund. I'm not saying we're close to any of those, but, like, if we're able to use that in favor of, like, growing our business and service, then I think it makes sense.
I'm curious, is this your first ever business?
Yeah, no, I had a couple other startups I was working on in college. This was, like, like we started it in college. So in my junior year, kind of started off as a side project. After that, I kind of worked on another startup with a couple of friends. We raised capital for that, made a ton of mistakes. But these were kind of friends I had from Berkeley, and kind of midway into kind of that startup, I realized that Levels was kind of growing organically without me doing much. Like, I was kind of maintaining the site and we were kind of working on it, but it was kind of starting to take off and people were very interested in like just adding more companies, more information. And so in 2019, we both, like me and my co-founder, decided to just go full time kind of on it. But before that, like I've worked on a ton of projects, and like I said, like I like to think of things as projects because it's just, that's the fun phase of things. And so in college, I was working on tons of projects, like probably like hundreds of projects, just random things, sites, like apps. And it was a ton of fun. And honestly, that's like what most of it was. It was just for fun. And then Levels FYI was also actually one of those projects. It was just for fun. But eventually realized it could be something bigger. And that's when we kind of decided like, hey, we should really take this to where we can take it. Like, and so.
Yeah. So you talked about like having formal processes and like that drains creativity. Like you're still a pretty fun guy, right?
Yeah, I hope.
How do you maintain that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's first being deliberate about having a small team, right? We deliberately want to keep a very kind of small team with everyone having a high degree of autonomy. So people are able to do things like when people on our team have an idea, I want them to be like, hey, let's like their first thing shouldn't be, oh, like I got to run this past like Zuhayeer or something. Their first thought should be, how can I go test and validate this idea? How can I actually do this thing? How can I run it? And giving that level of autonomy, I think, allows people to just it gives them some ample room for mistakes and being able to learn from them, and also just acting on their impulses and ideas. And I think that's the environment you just want to capture in a startup. Is you don't want people to be bottlenecked by their own like just mental thought, like, oh, dude, that'll be like hard to like get past like, our leadership or something. Like that's like you've just killed the idea right there, And so I think just allowing people the room to make mistakes and just do things, I think gives people the room to be creative and just flourish like in your company. And so just allowing people to do that, and sometimes it takes some patience, right? Like people make mistakes, but I think that's part of the process. And the whole thing I mentioned about the iterative process is you learn very quickly. When a mistake is a mistake, you learn very quickly. So it's not a mistake for long. You'll just continue learning, you'll iterate, and you'll get to a point where perhaps it's even successful, right? And so allowing people to have their own projects, their own kind of things that they work on, we're very much about that. Like our blog is typically actually not even us. Like all of our blog is written by like all of our employees because they come up with these unique insights. You'll find me posting about it, but it's mostly our folks like just coming up with ideas and kind of choosing to like, dive into our data and things like that.
So the other thing I wanted to ask you was like what keeps you up at night?
That's a good question. I think the international stuff I mentioned, I think one of the things that we really want to nail is getting kind of our international experience right. Not just, I think we do a decent job in the US of representing compensation and maybe the jobs market, like in tech at least. But internationally, we're very far off. And I think our goal is to basically capture like the same representation we have for like the US abroad. And so for us, that means like going into like all the tiny details that matter, because we captured a lot of tiny details here. Like, people here use W-2 tax forms and use like RSU, mostly get paid in RSUs within tech, but in other places it's very different. There's like different bonus structures. Like for example, in India, people think of salary as a monthly value, not just like annual value, right? And so when they're talking to their friends, they're mentioning the monthly value, and they don't consider equity as much. It's very cash based. Like cash salary is king over there. So all of these like nuances and cultural differences, we want to capture in how people kind of actually view it on the site. And so I mean that involves like at the very basic level, just currency, like viewing it in your native currency, your current locale. And some of the details that we actually go into for this is like probably worthy of a talk of itself, but you'll notice that like the decimal placements that we show in different like places are different, and the use of like different locale formatting is very different. Like some places will use periods instead of commas, and that will be the separation. Some places will use spaces. Some locations will not show zeros, and they'll just like show empty space. And like it's very different based on like where you are in the world. And so a lot of our focus is in like capturing all of that, so that when you're viewing it, it feels like you're viewing it for your locale. And part of that is also like, I feel like what it has been so far is people come to our site to view US salaries, even from other countries. We want to change that so that when you're in your country, you're viewing it for your country. You can view US if you want, but you're getting information for your particular area. And so localization has like been a big thing on my mind, and a lot of the changes we've made recently on our site is invisible to US users because we've already kind of helped US users, but international users are starting to like notice like a lot of changes on our site.
So on that note, like you post on your LinkedIn stuff, right? Like, someone who joined Facebook or NVIDIA 2020, those equity that US engineers get, actually they become millionaires overnight, right? Once the stock plummets.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing a lot of our maybe friends or people we may know are raising huge rounds for AI, right? Like, Anthropic is more like, you heard of Decacon, or Devin, for everyone knows Devin, right? Devin,
yeah.
So Sam Altman says, this future is going to be, you're going to create $1 billion company with just like one person.
Yeah.
I think it might be like a stretch, but I think 10 people definitely happens. And OpenAI pays like their top engineers like $1 million, $900K, right?
Yeah.
So like, do you see the difference in salaries from like AI engineers to software engineers, like more and more like crazy, like unheard amounts? Like it's not leveling at this point. It's like step function, like above. Do you see like those type of companies increasing more?
I think so. I mean, I think there's definitely a disparity. I think salaries are a lagging indicator of what's going on because competition like kind of just continues on, and these salaries really work up once there is some friction for getting that talent. That's why it kind of works up to where it is. And to be honest, OpenAI is just like a small example of this. OpenAI may be like a more minute kind of example compared to if you look at the packages that even Google or Facebook that they're giving these research scientists, it's actually either similar or more. And we've actually even seen like in our own kind of negotiations, people who had OpenAI offers, that were kind of getting pulled away from Google, where Google would be like, hey, we're going to throw you like a $4 million retention grant right now, to just not go to OpenAI. So I think like, I think that market is definitely heating up. There's compensation has been rapidly increasing. I think the question there remains, and even companies like NVIDIA, like taking an engineer out of NVIDIA into like a new AI hardware company is also very expensive, because that like that individual is probably making like millions of dollars like at NVIDIA. And so unseating them from NVIDIA is also very expensive. And that like eventually kind of brings up the market for that type of engineer as well. So I think generally like these are just market, like this is just the market at play in some sense. But I think the question remains of like, I think one thing we notice is there was this article about semi-retirement for NVIDIA engineers, where engineers are very quickly able to retire, because even 2 years ago, if you had joined and you got like somewhat of a substantial stock grant, you're a millionaire now. And so do you just keep working, or do you just go chill, right? Like, and so I think it raises this question of how much does it affect retention to like grow too fast, and how much turnover is there, like people going to other places, or even just people coming into NVIDIA with like maybe mixed expectations now, because like the stock is high, right? Like, and perhaps people are coming expecting like that same sort of growth. Does that affect retention now? Where if you don't maintain that growth in the next couple of years, do people leave? So I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting questions, but the market is doing what the market does, right? It's finding talent, and I mean, the information says that people were willing to pay these employees that much, right? And that's all you need to know that that's what the market has defined, right?
We're gonna stop here. Thank you so much.